Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. This week we're going to talk about diversity in children's and young adult books. And first I want to go over some definitions. The most basic definition that's been used about multicultural or diverse books is books by and about people of color. This is a definition that's used. I'm going to show you some statistics that are collected by the Cooperative Center for Children's Books in I think University of Wisconsin. And they basically use a very simple definition when they are deciding how to collect their statistics, and they use this definition. But really, it concerns a wider range of diversity and includes gender, sexual orientation, differing abilities, and any culture that lacks power or authority in a society. So any culture that is marginalized or does not have a lot of members or a lot of power. And that's Eliza Dresang's definition of multicultural books. Rudine Sims Bishop, who we'll talk about a little bit more throughout the lecture, defines multicultural books as works that reflect the racial, ethnic, and social diversity that's characteristic of our pluralistic society and of the world in general. The world is a very diverse place, even though sometimes we can live in a very homogeneous section of it and where we see mostly people who look like us. So we have to be aware of how diverse the world is. Charles Temple et al. Said multicultural literature reflects the multitude of cultural groups within the United States. Again, due to the way that our country developed, it is quite diverse. And from Native Americans who were here before we came to the various groups of immigrants who come in, and the various different cultures, if you include this wider range of diversity, gender, sexual orientation, it becomes quite a broad, quite a multitude of different perspectives that we're looking at. And finally, Golnick and Shin suggested that a truly multicultural approach reflects diversity in a number of microcultures. And they said ethnicity, which we talked about, social-economic level, religion, language, gender, disabilities or exceptionalities, and age. So all of those factors can play into what we would consider diverse material to have in the library. So important to have multicultural literature. It's important for people to get a broader perspective. If you only have one racial or ethnic group represented in your material, or only one gender, one social class, then it's a very superficial view. Your students are going to be reading, or the people in your library are going to be exposed to not the full range of plurality that's available and out there. It could just reflect back to them what they see all the time. Culturally relevant literature allows teens to establish personal connections with the characters, and this is because if you are from one of the many diverse groups, seeing yourself in literature allows you to develop that connection, and it makes reading that much more appealing. So if you are, if you are of a marginalized group who's not represented in the literature, then maybe you get tired of reading about people that don't look like you and experiences that are not like yours. If you come from the inner city, maybe it's good for a change to read about a white suburban neighborhood and the problems of white suburbia, but perhaps you're not going to establish as personal a connection as you will if you have a book in your hands that lets you see yourself in the book. And that's what, skipping to the bottom, Rudine Sims Bishop talks about with windows and mirrors, and actually sliding glass doors she's added to this. But with a window, mirrors are what I'm talking about in the second bullet point, where you can see yourself in the literature. So if you have a diverse literature in your library that represents all of the different kinds of groups that we were talking about in the definitions, a student can pick up a book and have a chance of seeing themselves reflected in that book. It's also important for us to have windows into other cultures. So it's important for me as a white person, a white female, to read about the experience that a black male might have. It's important for me to see how other cultures operate and what is happening in other cultures. I've been reading some fantasy, which I'll talk about when we talk about science fiction and fantasy, that involves African-based mysticism and fantastical points of view. So it's less of a Lord of the Rings Tolkien kind of fantasy and more influenced by Yoruba beliefs. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. So it's a great window for me to see other cultures in the books. And Sliding Glass Doors allows bridges to be built by, you know, I'm reading about somebody else's culture, they're seeing themselves in that reading, and we have a place to connect. We can walk through and talk to each other because we have a common vocabulary through the books that we read. The other thing that adding multicultural literature with multiple perspectives is it adds the perspectives of dominated cultures missing from textbooks and standard accounts. So if we're reading about the Mexican-American War, we know about it from the American point of view, let's read about it from a Mexican point of view. Or just Native Americans are often erased in textbooks other than, you know, Columbus came, everybody died, and then Native Americans are gone. And that's not true. They're still around. They were horribly decimated. I was just reading the numbers that they're talking about that were killed when Europeans and Native Americans on both North and South America interacted because of germs and just the conquering of people, but a lot of it was germs that natives were exposed to that had bred in the industrialized areas of European countries and then were brought over. Smallpox is one example. Just like, I don't know, 52 million people or something ridiculous like that. So, so it's great to have books in your library and in your collections that allow people to have different points of view and give a different perspective on what's happened in our history. And it also develops cultural competency in both your students and your teachers if they're willing to read this material, and yourself as you read it. So Gloria Ladson-Billings says that culture is a lens through which we view the world. It doesn't determine ability, but it shapes how that ability is processed and expressed. So different cultures will find different things important and emphasize different things, and that's why ability can look different to different people. So students don't enter schools as empty vessels, even if you're from even different, like my husband's Italian, my father's family was Swedish, not that we got much of the Swedish culture. They were of the immigrants that wanted to become very American. But there's a difference in how we approach things, you know, emotionally, culturally, what we're shaped as, you know, how we approach material that you can see. So even closely connected, even just family traditions. If you think about family traditions from family to family about something like how you celebrate Christmas. Some people open presents Christmas Eve, if you celebrate Christmas. Some people don't celebrate Christmas. It's probably a bad example, but there's different ways what a family dinner looks like together, and whether it's loud or whether it's quiet. And all of those things don't change the abilities people have, but could influence what that looks like when they come into the classroom. So understanding cultural competency, it can be helped by having different books and exposing your students to different cultures through the material you have in the library. These are the statistics I was talking about. The CCBC does them, and they started out in 1985, going back to our discussion last week about the Coretta Scott King Awards, and that started in the early 70s, and they were looking at what the pool of authors and illustrators looked like, and they started keeping statistics, because this particular CCBC gets 3,000 to 5,000 books a year. They get most of what's popularly published every year. So they went through and looked at, from 1985 to 1993, books published by Black authors and illustrators. And of the total published, you can see that the highest year was in 1992, 2.1% of all of the books published in children's and young adult literature were by Black authors or illustrators. They expanded out 94 to 2001, and this is where you can see where they're talking about by and about people of color in discussing diverse literature. This is how they measure it. And they started looking at how many books were by African Americans and how many were about African Americans. And you can see there's more about than there is by, which kind of leads to questions of authenticity, which I saw some discussion. I haven't read the full week 3 discussion, but I saw you talking a little bit about it in terms of awards and authenticity. Can somebody from outside of a culture, how well can they write about that culture? And it turns out that there's a lot more published about African Americans than by African Americans, almost double or more than double. Can't do math. Then they also started collecting statistics by and about Asian Pacific Americans, American Indians, and Latinos. And really the Latinos almost is most interesting, because the population of the Hispanic population is so large in this country. The other reason this is so important is there's a statistic that by, I can't think of the date, 2020, 2025, something like that, more than 50% of the students in schools will be minority students. So it'll be a majority minority student population, which I think is very interesting. 2002 to present, and I haven't updated this chart recently, but I have another something to show you in the next page. They began splitting it down to by and about, and you can see again that there's many more written about than by in all categories. So there's, although again, it shocks me how little is written about Latino, by and about the Latino population. And here is a infographic that was developed by, this is the CCBC, and it's from those statistics, Sarah Park Dalen, and I think I gave you her website to look at, or I'm going to give it to you this time, and Molly Beth Griffin, I think she did the, David Huck did the illustration. So less than 1% about American Indians, First Nations, 2.4% Latina, and this is just depicting characters, so this is both, this is the about statistics. 3.3% Asian Pacific and Asian Pacific Americans, 7.6% African Americans. That statistic's getting up there a little bit, but there was actually more books published with about animals and trucks, or animals and trucks as main characters, than there were about basically all of these combined. And 73.3% of the characters in books published in 2015 were white. So 73.3% white, which is kind of Sad. So some things to think about when you're looking at books, to kind of analyze them and decide if they're good diverse books or if they're maybe not so good diverse books. One of the things you want to look at is if it has illustrations. What do the illustrations look like? Are they stereotypes? Are they tokenism, just having to add one character in there just for the sake of having one extra character that's diverse? Who is doing what? Is the main white character have all the action and any diverse characters are just following along? And invisibility, are there just, have we erased all diverse characters at all? One of the things I find interesting, this is a very stereotypical portrait of a Mexican, the sombrero, the, you know, the other thing I found interesting about this particular illustration from Charlie Brown, and I love Charlie Brown, not knocking Charlie Brown, but I thought it was very interesting that of the human characters, that this particular person of color is not connected to the other people at all. You see that even Linus's sister, I can't think of her name, is connected, their hair is connected to Peppermint Patty. But this gentleman, whose name I don't remember, has absolutely no connection with the other characters. Was he added on later? Why is he not touching the other characters? I just think that's very interesting. And it's these kinds of unconscious types of bias or unconscious types of statements that an image might make. And maybe this wasn't making it. I can't say for sure. I just find it really interesting. And certainly I would be more likely to include something like this as okay than this, unless somebody told me that they had a problem with the way that they were depicted in that book. And I'm going to give you the website this is from, but these are some common harmful undermining stereotypes, which we've all heard before, that, you know, book-loving or non-athletic boys and men are effeminate. People with disabilities are to be pitied. American Indians live in teepees. All Muslims are Arab, and Arab or Muslim women are voiceless and passive. These are easy stereotypes to get to not realize that they are in the book until you really have them pointed out to you. And people who are invisible, blue-collar workers, homeless families. How often do you have a book with a homeless family in it? Single mothers or fathers are not as common. Transgender, now we're starting to find more transgender adults and children in books, but one of the books I gave you as a choice to read, I think I gave you George this week, has a transgender child in it, and that's very recent, often and very problematic in terms of the controversies it causes with people not wanting to put it in their libraries. Check the storyline of books. What are the standards for success? What's the resolution of problems? For example, what's the role of a woman? What does a successful woman look like? I found this a long time ago. These are lessons that Disney princesses, and again, I love these stories. I'm not saying don't have these stories, but let's think about what some of these things might be telling girls who read them at tender ages. So some pretty girls don't even need to be alive to get some hot princely action. Appearances don't matter unless don't matter. What counts is what's in your heart, unless you're the girl. Beauty and the Beast. The Beast is okay. We fall in love with him when he's ugly, but but we're not going to fall in love with an ugly girl. As a woman, your political worth is reduced to your marriageability. So remember from Aladdin, she's being married off. In the end, that kind of counteracts that, I think, because he winds up not, the father makes a different proclamation, but it's just interesting. So is the standard for success different for a diverse character than for a white character? And who resolves the problems, and how are they resolved? Are they resolved in favor of the status quo, or does something change? Look at lifestyles. Are there negative value judgments, inaccurate, again, or inappropriate depiction, the quaint natives and costume syndrome? And here is Spencer va El Paso, and I think that's just, Spencer's an absolutely adorable dog, but he's really, you know, quaint natives and costume kind of thing for an El Paso. This book, Coolies, is a wonderful book that shows great relationships between the two brothers. But one of the things to look at is, do minorities only have supporting roles? In this case, this is a story of these two brothers. It's beautifully told about their family relationship. It's not just, you know, they're not put there as a plot device. They're making their own decisions. And it's just telling the real story of a family, not just putting two characters of two diverse characters in there to interact to further the plot. Who are the heroes? Are they safe heroes, or are they maybe doing something radical, like in George, that is one of your options for reading this week? Is he able to, is he safe? Does he follow the status quo? Is he able to be what he wants to be, or what people expect him to be? And who benefits from the hero's actions? Is it the person of color, or is it the white person? It is a hero who happens to be a person of color, or different ethnicity or different religion benefit the, you know, white Christian mainstream person. Effect on child's self-image. Often white equals beauty and black equals evil. If you remember The Lady and the Tramp, some of you might be too young, old Disney movie where, you know, the Siamese cats were the evil ones, which I always thought was unfair to the cats, because Siamese cats are nice. And body image, we're making fun of Augustus Gloop in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. How does that feel if you're an overweight child, seeing that, you know, he's the butt of jokes? And then we talked a little bit about authenticity when I talked about the statistics. So consider, if you're looking at a book and trying to decide, is this a well-done, diverse book that tells a good story that's not stereotyped and adds to our understanding of a culture? Look at the experience of the author or illustrator. Look at the blurb on the back. Have they had some interaction with the community? Are they part of that community, which could add to the authenticity of their portrayal, either in the art or the text, or both? There's just some things when people of a culture review a book written by somebody outside the culture, that unless that author or illustrator has done a lot of work or interacted with the culture a lot, don't get the nuances right. And so there's something to be said for privileging a depiction of a culture that's told from the inside. Look at the cultural perspective. Is it Eurocentric? Are we looking at the Western point of view rather only, or do we have multiple perspectives? And the personal context, is it white, middle class, or do we expand beyond that? And sometimes, even though it purports to be a book about diversity, it particularly, I think, with books about disabled people particularly seem to get the personal context wrong, which can expand beyond white and middle class to your experience as somebody in the shoes, or with the issue, or with the limitation, or with the and I hate to even say limitation because disabled people don't feel like they're limited, you know, but with the disability, what does it really look like from that perspective? Watch for loaded words: savage, primitive, inscrutable, wily, backwards. These are all words that have very negative connotations. They could be used in a way that's not negative, but you have to be very careful when you see them used. And even I include this illustration here because it's from a Newbery winner. Remember I talked about not all Newbery winners, just because they won the medal at some point, are something that we want to include in our collection. This is a terribly racist portrayal um, of an Indian attack, and of Indians, and it's probably not even proper apparel for the Indians of the time that were in wherever they were. So it's just and it's just a loaded illustration. So stereotypes, tokenism, invisibility, loaded words, relationships, these are all things that you need to look for. And I'm going to include the slides on this, but this is a great thing to read. Guides for selecting anti-biased children's books. And here's that box: Uncommon and Undermining Stereotypes, Tokenism, if you want to read more about that. Relationships between people. So are people of color, women, low-income families, or people with disability depicted as needing help in passive roles, while able-bodied and men are able to take the action roles. And messages about lifestyles. So there's all kinds of additional information about what I'm talking about here, and also some other links to excuse me, other links to information on multicultural books. When you're developing lessons or helping your teachers develop lessons, if you're in the library, number one, choose high quality text to start with and develop your lesson around the text, but also move up from this touristic approach. People tend to look at food, fashion, fiestas, folklore, and famous people, which really just gives you a very shallow view of a different culture. So we need to go a little deeper and actually read literature written from inside, and that's the high quality text that's got a point of view from inside the culture, that's authentic, will definitely allow a different kind of lesson plan to develop that will move up from these 5 F's. So just a few books, because I'm going to be giving you books throughout the semester that are diverse, but these are a few books. This is a great series, Rita Williams Garcia, and there's 3 sisters, Delphine, Vanetta, and Fern Gaither, and it's their experiences in the 60s. So it's a great, I heard Rita Williams Garcia speak. She's wonderful. She's such a warm and amazing person, and these books are just really wonderful, and they're great. They're Newbery books. Well, the first one won Newbery, and you see it won Newbery, Scott Odell, Coretta Scott King, and it was a National Book Award finalist. And then this one won a Coretta Scott King. I don't know, oh, this one, Coretta Scott King also. So great series for middle graders, and you get the history. In One Crazy Summer, they go to LA or San Francisco, I forget which, and become acquainted with people from the Black Panther movement, and you get to see some of the other perspectives in that they were feeding people. You know, we kind of think of the Black Panther movement, I think, as violent, and not everybody does. People who know more about it wouldn't, but they were also feeding people and having clinics to take care of people. So there's that other perspective of people. So these are great books. Jingle Dancer I love because it's written by a Native American about a current customs within the community, and she's the young protagonist in this picture book is putting together a jingle dress. There's the little metal cones that they attach to dresses, and it's part of a dance that the tribe does. I can't remember off the top of my head which tribe she is. One of the things when you're talking about Native Americans is try not to talk about them in a group. There's like 582 tribes in the United States, something like that, and we should identify them as their tribe because it makes a difference. I also like to find books like this. Unfortunately, this was not a great book, but I just wanted to use this as an example of, you don't even think about how often the covers of nonfiction books feature don't feature people of color, don't feature people in wheelchairs, don't even feature females even. I did some research on covers of award-winning, I did covers of books, and then I did some looking at award-winning nonfiction books, and it's almost twice as many males as females are represented in the images throughout the books, and as twice as many people, white people, as people of color. So the ratio is way off. So I love it when you see diverse a diversity on the covers of different books. I just wanted to mention that 2015 was a banner year for Newbery because we had Crossover, which was by African American, featuring an African American family. El Deafo, which was a graphic novel featuring it's kind of a memoir by somebody who was deaf. And Jacqueline Woodson, Brown Girl Dreaming, which is also a memoir by an African American. So there was really crossover. I think El Deafo also won Schneider. These only have one medal on them, but so you can see where there's been a trend in more recent times that more of books written by and about diverse groups are being recognized. Some resources. CCBC, yes, Cooperative Children's Book Center, they have a whole page on multicultural literature with recommended readings and different lists. Oyate is a Native American site that they used to have a lot more reviews on there, but you can look at for some books. They do have some reviews of new Native American books coming out. Lee and Low Books is amazing. They also have a blog, and they do a ton of work on diversity. If you're looking to increase your looking for really good diverse books, this is a good place to come. Read their blog, look at what they're publishing. Cinco Puntos Press does a lot of books for, I think they've been actually, oh no, they're still an ally, with Latino, Hispanic, but I think they also do other diverse groups. I think I mentioned this blog last week, American Indians and Children's Literature, or in the week before when I talked about resources. I get lost in my weeks. She has a ton of books of reviews of Native books and reviews of books. Her perspective is that Native Americans are often poorly portrayed in children's literature, children's and YA literature, thus giving the general public an inaccurate idea of what it is to be Native American. Oh, I meant to take that off. The We Need Diverse Books, I talked about last week. Sarah Park Dalen is Asian American, but Dahlen, I'm not sure how to say her name, but she also does a lot on adoption and children's literature. So if you're looking for good books on adoption, particularly when it comes to, or information about it, she writes about that. And she has some bibliographies here. Folk tales, middle grade, newer books, picture books. It's always good to see what other people are recommending here. The Name Jar, that's a wonderful one. So this, my cat copies me. So she's, of course, she's more able, because she's from within the culture, she's more able to give us an idea of whether or not the culture is well represented in a book. So some awards to be aware of: the Carter G. Woodson, which is National Council for Social Studies. They do a book for most distinguished book appropriate for young readers that depict ethnicity in the United States. And so they also have winners and honorees. So this is a great place to look for material. Oh, I love this book, Separate is Never Equal. Wonderful book. The Margaret Batchelder Award, I think I might have mentioned it last week or the week before. These are books that are translated. No, I'm sorry. Translated, yes. These are translated books. And the thing about translated books is I always feel like they were originally written for the people in another culture. So they're obviously, it's like if somebody's reading a book written for Americans in America, you'll get an idea of the culture rather than somebody from Sweden writing about Americans in America. So here you're getting a book that was written in Lithuania for Lithuanian children, and it's been translated, and so you get a different perspective because the writing's going to be a little bit different. It's going to have a different sensibility. Not so much that you don't want to read it, but it will have slightly different sensibility, and you're getting an insider's perspective of that culture. Not that it's the full culture. The other thing to think about when you're choosing multicultural books for your library and your collection is that one book can't tell the whole story. Just like one book would not tell the whole story of American culture. You can't read one book about that takes place in America with American characters and understand the culture. So just because you have one book on a topic doesn't mean that you've represented the whole culture. So the Asian Pacific American Libraries Association has awards, and they have young adult literature. Darius the Great is Not Okay. This got a lot of press this year. And they also, The Astonishing Color of After, and then they have a children's literature front desk. I wish they put pictures on here. House That Lou Built, and then Picture Book, Drawn Together, and Grandmother's Visit is the honor book. And American Indian Youth Literature Award, 2018 awards. Yes, so these are the new books, I think, that they just put out. They only do it every 2 years. And the Association of Jewish Libraries also has a book award. And here's their press release for this year. All of a Kind Family Hanukkah, Sweep, Story of a Girl and Her Monster, Silver Medalist. So there's, again, religion. I really haven't included anything with different religions, or I haven't included Muslim books. There's I think I have some later in the slides. I mean, later in controversial books, I've included some of those. And that's it. So I've asked you to read 2 diverse books. One is either George or Stella by Starlight. George is about a trans individual, and Stella by Starlight is African American in the 1930s, I think. And then another book of your choice that includes a diverse main character, and indicate in your book log, your reading log, what the diversity is, how you saw this as a diverse book. So thank you very much, and I will see you on the discussion board.